Thank you very much for joining me today, Adam. So we're going to talk about longevity, which is a bit of a there's a lot of buzz around this right now within like the health industry, and I think there's a lot more shift from people focusing solely on their bodies and solely on like aesthetics towards improving health. But I guess I want to understand from your perspective, where do you think this is coming from?
It's a good question because I never really thought too much about it before you just mentioned it like a few minutes ago. But where I think is that like we have more information, more access to information, and I think it's more of a bit of an echo chamber because you still have a lot of people who really struggle with their health that probably are not going to listen to this podcast. They're probably, what they most likely are, on the poverty line, or really struggle to even do the kind of the basics with regards to health. And it's more like um, the worried well almost, where people are starting to worry about all these different things because so much information is coming. Obviously, you've got like the likes of the podcasts from like Huberman and like Peter Attia, and there's probably more than that now that are pretty big, where they're all talking about like how to optimize your longevity or your health span or your wellness. And I think that's where it's coming from. And it just feels like it's something novel that people can focus on. Like people like love to do new things and focus on shiny objects. And I feel that's where it's starting to become, well, that's why it's getting big. You don't see people who, like I said, can afford or struggle to afford to do the basics worrying about their longevity. They're kind of worrying about like putting food on the table.
Yeah, I guess like one thing you mentioned there with the shiny object syndrome, like I wonder how much of what is being like pushed as like these are things we should buy, supplement with, like different types of therapies, cold plunges, red light therapy. How much of these are just like new fads that are coming in that are distracting people from the things that we've known for a long period of time that do improve health? So like, do you think like there's been anything that's maybe come out in like the last decade which has like changed like the scientific opinion on what are like big drivers of increasing health span?
Oh, it's a good question because a lot of the stuff that's coming out is like tech, right?
Yeah.
And like gadgets. And it's hard to say whether any of those specific things have had any major meaningful impact. Like things like blood pressure monitors, like these have been out for more than a decade. But I guess some of the home devices have been pretty sufficient. But I don't have any data on whether people are actually buying these or using them at home, right? People are buying, like I've had an Aura ring, I've had like various different fitness tracking watches, Garmin's, Fitbits, all of these. I think maybe that might have an impact. I haven't looked at any kind of data to see like what people's activity has, how it's improved over time with the emergence of these devices. Because realistically, we want something that's more widespread rather than like, yeah, I know a guy who has like a sauna in his back garden and he's like he feels better, or like how do you quantify if someone's living longer or it's even improving their health other than a perception of well-being. But something if you actually want to probably look at something that's generally improving health or longevity, it's like, well, are we does that thing lead to increasing or improvement of adherence to the basics realistically? So I think maybe step trackers. I know they've most likely been around for more than a decade, but there's definitely a surgence of people using fitness wearables, whether it's like Fitbits or Apple Watches and things like that. I think even if that helps people be a bit more adherent to just getting some movement, I think that's probably a benefit. But then you also have other factors that like have changed things that might muddy that water, where it probably needs to be some research, as in like the lockdowns, like people's steps went through the floor, right? Then it led to kind of more remote working, where people just never really went back into an office. And then obviously there's a lot more knowledge work now. People are doing like what you or I do, or sit at a desk all day. So is that a confounding variable that like's actually shown that, well, we didn't see a net positive? I don't actually know, but I think there probably hasn't been many. So like I make some content around like longevity and things like that, and a lot of the clients that I would work with are kind of interested in that. And I can only speak from my perspective, but almost all of the people who I work with that are doing things like NAD infusions, or they're doing like stem cell therapy, and they're avoiding certain foods or trying certain protocols based on like what they've read on a podcast, listened to on a podcast, or seen on YouTube. Almost all of them, if not all of them, are neglecting the basics, like, and quite to a measurable degree, as in like not eating enough fruits and vegetables, like having excess body fat, not doing anywhere near enough cardio, maybe lifting some weights, but maybe not consistently.
Yeah, it's kind of like the health equivalent, the health focus equivalent of the people spending all their money on like the new pre-workout to, get jacked. It's like it's kind of like that, just in a different direction. And I guess like it is enticing because it does seem like an easy option. If this is, spoke about on a big podcast in regards to, we saw this mechanism when they did use this supplement or they used this therapy. But again, it's like you're stepping over pennies or stepping over dollars to pick up pennies, right? And I think that's kind of a lot of what I see is like people over indexing on small artifacts, like doing cold plunges, doing things like saunas, which are fantastic add-ons. And as you said, if they, as a result of doing those, they allow you to focus on maybe adhering to more of the basic stuff. That's fantastic. But it's not a case of, as you said, like you go do a sauna and you're like, okay, cool, that's added a bit now to my quality of life or years to my life. One thing I guess is probably an important thing to distinguish is the difference between like lifespan and health span.
Yeah, just before we kind of go on to that, one thing I was just thinking is very recently is obviously the introduction of those like drugs like Ozempic, tirzepatide, etc., the peptide hormones, and that's obviously a broad term. So like those specific ones, like the GLP ones, they seem to be having a major impact on, or potentially will have a major impact on health span. Of course, the access to them is only like relatively recent. Like I don't think I think I might have heard of someone using. I think I might have heard of them for the first time maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Now I know people, like quite a lot of people that are using them. It seems to be a lot more accessible. I think in certain countries it might be a bit more difficult or a bit more expensive. It's not covered by insurance, or you have to get through hoops. I mean, I don't understand the various different insurance things and healthcare systems in all countries, but they seem to be very, very beneficial. But it just does come back to the body fat, right? So it just gets people's body fat down. And again, like I think they are definitely beneficial for a lot of people who really struggle with like food noise, or they're just genetically predisposed to being just higher body fat percentages. That really, like, it's just they have to put in a lot more effort than someone who finds it easy to be lean. So I think that's probably, or most certainly, going to be the biggest mover of longevity. But that's almost like taking people. So you have like longevity, you have actual longevity, like people who are like shortening their lifespan, because of like their kind of lifestyle. Obviously there's genetic factors, but lifestyle where they're like overweight and they don't, and then they're, and like Ozempic and things like that will take people from, I think, like overweight to like a normal body weight. Obviously you have people abusing it, but then a lot of the people who are focused on like longevity and the hacks are actually people who are already doing or they're doing a lot of things right, and they want to get even better, or like optimize every little thing. And then you have people who are in that bottom category. I don't mean that in a kind of a ranking way, but I mean like people who are like in a deficit of health, as in maybe they're overweight, or they're doing less than the recommendation of recommended amount of cardio, whatever, and they're focusing on the stuff that like the optimizers are focusing on, rather than like the basics. But yeah, lifespan is basically just how long you live, and then health span is harder to actually define because there's no real clear definition. But basically, how long you lived, kind of disease free. But I don't know if that's necessarily the best definition, because, for example, I have genetic hypertension and I'm on medication. So like technically, you would have said my lifespan was like 24 years old or 25 years old. So it's not, because hypertension is technically like a disease, right? So it's living kind of like an independent life. So it is hard to say, like, is there a cutoff point exactly? okay, this person no longer has, your health span is over. You only have lifespan left.
Yeah.
But it's more just being able to do most of the things that you could do, and not in really poor health.
Yeah, maintaining function and maintaining independence, like that's how I would personally think about it. Because yeah, like I guess you always feel a little bit kind of sad when you see like the elderly person who, and they could be that old, right? They could be like in their fucking mid 60s, and like they struggle to like bring the groceries out of the car into their home, or they struggle walking up like the flight of stairs, and like 60, you see some 60-year-olds who are in great shape, like and still look like relatively young, and I guess like we could talk about like what are the difference between those and the 60-year-olds who are still kind of living like a good quality of life. But before I get that, I kind of want to circle back to like you talked about being overweight and how that is something that obviously GLP-1s and everything like that will help, obviously, like improve your diet and everything. But like why is being overweight, like why is that a bad thing for our health span? Like does it increase risk of disease? So yeah, I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, so obesity, it really depends on what type of fat you have, right? So it's not just body fat. So that's why you have to look at like kind of what type of fat you have. So for example, South Asian men will have they have to essentially have a lower body fat percentage than like Caucasian men, if they want the same kind of health outcomes in terms of like body fat, because they just hold more central adiposity. So subcutaneous fat isn't actually too dangerous, or let's say metabolically active, which is the fat just under your skin, right? So like, after your bodybuilding show, you're like, I'm after gaining fat, like, is my health span going to have disimproved? It's like, well, you're still like, 15% body fat or something. But it's actually the type of fat. So when you have visceral fat, which is around the organs, or ectopic fat, which is when your body starts to store fat in organs where it's not supposed to be stored, that starts to influence like VLDLs, so very low density lipoproteins, which are like one step before low density lipoproteins, LDL, which people call the bad cholesterol, but like it's a carrier protein for cholesterol. And it also can impact, so when you start to have fat like in your organs, then it can influence like in the pancreas, for example, can influence like your insulin production, so beta cell function. So then your body either has to pump out more insulin, so you have poor blood glucose control. So either your muscles or your fat cells are poor at uptaking glucose, or your body's actually poor at producing insulin. So then it starts to lead to like things like heart disease or diabetes. And if you have high levels, so if your body's not able to kind of mop up this glucose, so to speak, that's in your blood, that can be like very dangerous. So it starts to like basically damage your cells. So like that's why people with diabetes, they'll start to have like have to lose, to get their feet cut off, or like it damage their organs, or even the things like their eyes. And then also damages their like endothelial system, so their all the blood vessels and arteries, etc., in their body. And then it just leads to like it can increase the risk of plaque buildup, and then heart attack, stroke, aneurysms, and things like that. So heart disease is the number one cause of death worldwide, and there's a large component of that is due to like lifestyle factors. Then you have like that's multiplied then by hypertension. So if you're heavier, your blood pressure is going to be higher, and that then basically compounds the effects of having high cholesterol. And then also it's like associated with like certain types of cancers as well, because of those inflammatory signals that the body fat sends out. It starts to kind of have long-term low-grade exposure to inflammation, and that can increase the risk of certain types of cancers. So that's kind of how it influences it. So it's not really something that's going to happen next year. But most people who are overweight, they don't get overweight in a short period of time, and they don't lose the weight in a short period of time either. And so it really comes down to the type of body fat you have. But basically, if you just mapped it, like correlated it with body fat percent, those who are a higher body fat percent are going to have more visceral fat. They're going to have more ectopic fat than those who are super lean. Like if I've seen it like with clients and stuff that are like 15% body fat, and they want to get like DEXA scans or something to see their visceral fat, and it's like, well, it's going to be super low. You know, you don't need to really be worried about it. And even the same with people who are like maybe 30% body fat and they're like, oh, I want to see my visceral fat. It's like, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be probably a bit high. Like, and it's not going to change a whole lot of what we do. We're still trying to do the same things to get it down. So just lose overall body fat.
Yeah. So like there is a lot of like things that are coming alongside that like extra body fat that's happening internally versus like I think some people maybe in the healthy at every size type of movement would be like, oh well, like if we look healthy, we feel healthy, like we must be healthy. When again, it could be things that are happening beneath the surface that, as you mentioned, they're kind of compounding over a long period of time. It's not as if like heart disease you have it within a year of like living a certain way. It's like something that compounds for a long period of time before the actual negative effects maybe kind of rear their heads.
Mm.
There's something else I wanted to kind of mention it along that line, and I guess like when we're also looking at this maybe increase in body fat over time, we're also looking at like the behaviors that are attached to that, right? It's not as if we're looking at somebody's eating largely mostly whole unprocessed foods, doing lots of regular exercise, probably living like a relatively stress-free life. It's probably like the behaviors are going in like the opposite direction as to what you would consider to be kind of healthy behaviors. And that's like, again, that could be circumstantial, that could be like environment based, whatever. But I guess like they're also things that are driving these negative health effects over long term, because like stress, increasing cortisol over the long term, having chronically elevated levels of that, probably not too great for your cardiovascular system. Alongside like how easy it is to overconsume hyperpalatable foods, hyperprocessed foods, relative to if you had like the opposite of like single ingredient whole foods. So there is like a lot of things going on there. And I guess like for those people who are maybe kind of in that situation, like if we're looking at like the benefits of reducing body fat, what would be a kind of like marker where maybe we might start to see more of these health effects take place?
Yeah, so there's like some research. Like, do you mean like a percentage or something like that?
Yeah, not necessarily percentage, because I know like even people like losing a certain
Oh
percentage
yeah, got you. Yeah,
have improvements.
yeah. So even like losing like 5 to 10% of your body weight, regardless of size, can seem to have like a market impact on, like, it can lose like 30 to 50% of your visceral fat. Um, so like it's almost like diminishing returns. Like the leaner you get, the less benefit there is, which probably seems obvious, right? But um, so that's the good thing about it, is like you don't have to make huge changes to see some benefit. Obviously, that doesn't remove all risk, but even if you're like say 280 pounds and you get to 240, you will see like a significant improvement in your visceral fat levels. But that will usually be measured like as a proxy or down like a downstream effect. So you'll see things like your LDL will reduce, your blood pressure will reduce, triglycerides might reduce, your blood glucose control will improve. Um, so I think, yeah, that's empowering, because it's like it's diminishing returns, but also like you get the most bang for your buck from the initial fat loss. So
Mm.
like obviously I like follow like fitness coaches and things, and I see, Jesus, the amount of ads I see from fitness coaches on Instagram now, it's mad. But it's all like, oh, you need like, if you want to improve your health, get to 12% body fat. It's like, well, it's not like, you're kind of, again, that's really diminishing returns. Like literally, you're talking to a guy who's 35% body fat. It's not like he doesn't need to get down to 12% body fat to like, or else he doesn't care about his health. It's like if he gets to like 20, or even to 25, or even if he loses, like I said, 5 to 10% of his body, it will see significant improvements. I think, well, like that's true from the evidence that we have, but I also think that it can be a bit discouraging when you see like the coaches who are supposed to be, they're trying to go for what people will call Gen Pop, which is just like basically everybody, um, and but they're kind of painting this picture as if like, oh, you need to get to like where I am, which might be like more focused on aesthetics, and it sometimes can seem like just too much of a jump, I think, for people, and can be maybe a bit discouraging. And then people also expect that's what's required.
Mm.
Like people think, oh, I need to be like, oh, Brian Johnson is like 7% body fat, and he's like the pinnacle of health. So I probably need to get there. It's like, well, he probably got like 98% of the benefits of, let's say, from body fat percentage reduction when he got to 15, you know?
Mm. Yeah, I think there is still a disconnect with a lot of coaches in regards to what like healthy means. Like health is not like just synonymous with like being, in photo shoot condition or fantastic shape, right? Like so much of it is like behavior driven. Like obviously there is physical aspects to it, but there's also like, the other aspects, right? The social health, emotional health, all these different facets that like encompass like somebody's somebody's trajectory over the long period of time, because you can spend all the time in the world optimizing every aspect of your physical your physical self, but like if you're disconnected from people around you, like isolation is like one of the big reasons why people die in their kind of later years, right? Because they just like don't have that around them. Mental health could be something that takes a toll because you're over it, like over indexing on how many grams exactly of protein I should be having, or what exact supplements I should be taking, the timing of everything else, right? And that's just like being the only thing that's on your mind, and then all of a sudden, you're losing focus on every other aspect of your life, right? So there's all these kind of factors that I think people kind of miss the mark on, because like there's so much outside of your physical development that does matter from an actual longevity, quality of life perspective. You talk about that in a few of your videos, right? You talk about like the 80-20 principle. Could you explain
Mm.
that for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, the Pareto principle, it applies to everything in life, where it's
Mm.
like you get 80% of the reward from 20% of the input, or 80% of the output from 20% of the input. And then you could focus on the other 80% of the input to get the final 20%. And that can really be, like I said, applied to anything. But with health and fitness, I think it's because, like, going back to your analogy of like the pre-workout, like I remember when I was younger, I used to spend like an hour a week in the supplement shop where I lived, and I was like a teenager, and I would buy a supplement like every week, and I would borrow money off my mother to get to get money for supplements. And the guy behind the counter would literally sell me anything, and I think because he genuinely believed in it, like we actually
Mm.
became training partners. This Polish guy, um, and I was just trying to get like faster results or quicker results or whatever it meant, and it was more of a dopamine hit to just focus on something that was quick and easy and like different. Maybe because I was frustrated with my progress, or because it was I wasn't able to. I was impatient, more than likely, and of course, basically none of those supplements, other than probably the protein and the creatine, worked. But that's, I think, the same with the longevity space. Is that like people, they just want the result yesterday, so they just like, okay, what are the things that I can do that's like maybe it's fun and interesting? Because I think even some of those novel things that people try, a lot of people don't even stay consistent with those for long enough, right? They'll do it for a while. I tried, I don't know, tried a hyperbaric, oxygen chamber, oxygen chamber like once, or I did, NAD infusion once or something. Like these things that are not really gonna do a whole lot, but they may not even do them that consistently either. But when it comes to um, longevity, I think, or health span, we can kind of use those words interchangeably. I think um, it's really just focusing on like the the basic government guidelines. And I know people hate to follow what the government says, but like it's the same with diet as well. Like as you know yourself, like if people follow the actual dietary government guidelines, whether it's the new ones from RFK or the old ones, right? Even if you follow them for the most part, you're going to be in pretty good health. Obviously, you'll adapt that based on your specific, if you have a specific performance goal or like body composition goal, you'll like adapt that. But I think that's what it really comes down to. And then if you can't stick with that, it's like figuring out, well, why am I struggling to stick with that? Rather than, well, you know what, I'm struggling to get X amount of activity per day. So you know what, I bought a Whoop, and I'm gonna like look at that data and like analyze my HRV. When actually it's like, well, we need to figure out why you can't like get enough movement in, or why you only eat like one serving of fruits and vegetables per day, or why you struggle to hit your protein targets. Like, and that's a lot more difficult to do because it's boring, and a lot of time it's like emotional, and there's like internal resistance versus like I just bought this new thing and tried it. or I seen this video and I tried it. And they're the stuff that's like exciting, because I guess that's the same with anything, right? Like, oh, this new cryptocurrency coin has come out, like that's going to get you rich,
Yeah.
rather than just like saving. Bodybuilding, like, what would be an example? Oh, well, like, let's just focus on like, all my training is now going to be just length and partials, rather than like just consistency.
Mm.
Or all my training is just going to be like massively high volume and I'm going to use like optimal exercises for like improving, I don't know, like resistance curves. And that was a phase for a bit, right, as well. I don't know if it still is, but like whereas actually if you just be consistent with like anything and are making progress with it, like adding weight or reps over time, like you'll probably get to the same destination. And that's, I think it comes down to like people just being frustrated, get bored, and they want to try something new.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that the payoff takes a long period of time, I think, right? Like, as I said, right, with the supplement talk there, like, you feel like you're getting a quick reward when you do take a pre-workout and you get like that caffeine boost, right? And I think like people would like to expect the same when they're thinking about being consistent with a calorie intake, or, getting some immediate feedback from, improving their fruit and veg intake. And like some of it could be relatively immediate in regards to like how you feel day to day. Like, surely the person who is eating zero micronutrients for like, a week versus like the next week they have more micronutrients, like more diverse diet, surely they feel a little better, but they probably just don't notice it as such, because the payoff is actually still not in a half an hour. It's a lot harder to do.
Exactly, yeah.
Plus the extra time investment of actually having to make a diet that's more kind of diverse in nutrients, right? I think one thing that I will often try to get my clients to do, from trying to see trying to visualize the effects of this happening, is just like have like a checklist of like different behaviors and just try to check that off like day to day, so that at the end of the week they're not going to see like the benefit of like them having protein today, but if they can see across like a 7-day period that they've ticked that box every single day, and then they continue up with taking that box, all of a sudden in like whatever 6-12 weeks time, we've gone from a very low protein diet to high protein diet alongside keeping consistent with other behaviors. Okay, now you're starting to see that visual reward, but you're having something at least that's like allowing you to kind of focus on that task in that given moment and get the reward of just taking the box. Loads of people just find something like that being incredibly satisfying. It's like, on my fitness pal, you have like the streaks, and like people are like, I don't want to break that streak, I don't want to break the chain. And just that alone is kind of like gamifying the process a little bit, because again, yeah, you're not going to see the benefit of that individual behavior tomorrow. It's just all about kind of stacking that over a period of time, which is what really all this health iron stuff is about. You don't stop it. Like, it's just a continuation of habits over the long term. But you're kind of hoping at some point, by taking that box and doing that checklist for long enough, that they become behaviors in the background are just automatic.
Yeah, but it's like, what, again, even applying that 80-20 to what even research shows is optimal is important, because you'll see a lot of podcasts and things like that talking about the best way to improve VO2 max in the short term, and it will be like these high intensity, it's something's called the 4x4 Norwegian method. It's basically you run, it's just a kind of a 1-to-1 rest run ratio, and it's like fast, right? So you basically improve your fitness quite fast in the short term. But the thing is, when they look at longer term studies, these are like really intense like sessions, like where it's like someone is not going to do that multiple times a week, because like you're turning yourself. It's like doing like I don't know, someone who hasn't trained consistently in the gym. You're like, okay, we're going to do like 2-a-day training sessions, and it's going to be super high volumes. Like, yeah, you can do it for 2 weeks maybe, but like you might need to do it for like a year to see like proper actual like tangible results. So when I see people who are like, oh, what's the optimal like cardio that I want to do, I'll do it on the cross trainer or something like that, or I'll do sprints. Like, typically I'm asking like, what are you doing now? Because I know for sure that they're not going to stick to it if they're just looking at like what's optimal. It'd be exactly the same if someone came to you and said, oh, Shane, I want to like do my first bodybuilding show in 6 months, but I also want to I really want to try and win like my pro card, and I want to try to do everything optimal. Like, I'm going to track every single thing, and then you said like, oh, what are you doing right now? And like, and they're like, well, I'm kind of inconsistent with the gym, but I go maybe like once or twice a week, and I'm like, have you ever lost fat before? And like, no, I couldn't really stick to it, but I'm determined this time. That's a huge red flag, right? And that's exactly where a lot of people with the longevity, I think, is they just want the outcome often more than just like the process. And I think it's not to say that's what everyone, the same way in the bodybuilding example, there are people who literally would turn over every stone to get to try and win the pro card. But it depends on what that person is already doing. Like if they're not doing something consistently, it doesn't matter what the optimal is. Not because it won't work, it's because they just won't stick to it. Because if something feels like an effort, you won't do it very long. And that's why I tell people, it's like, well, let's try and find a performance-based goal. Because if you're just doing something like cross trainer or rowing like 3 times a week or sprinting, usually that's kind of extrinsically driven, like it's tied to a reward or a result or an end goal. The same with the bodybuilding. Like I've had clients myself when I used to coach more bodybuilding clients that just wanted to compete, and like they weren't in love of bodybuilding or the training, or they weren't doing it for years, and like they end up quitting the gym altogether, like which is mad to me. But it's because they just wanted to get on stage and compete, and when they didn't maybe place how they wanted, or it wasn't the outcome, they end up just quitting lifting, like which is crazy. So I think, yeah, like I get people to focus on a performance-based goal because that's usually more intrinsically driven and more likely to stick to long term. So I say, like, let's try and focus on, like, you want to climb this mountain, or like you might want to run a bit, or eat, like, and that's on the cardio side. It might be sometimes like a strength-based goal, not like, you know, crazy, but like, okay, I want to try hit this for a squat, bench, and deadlift over the next 6 months or something like that, because then you're driven by, you know, internal reasons like challenge and mastery, etc., rather than like, I'm just doing this to try and like get a certain number on my Whoop for my age or whatever it is.
Mm. Yeah, because like even achieving that number, like it's just a number at the end of the day. And like what, like if you're not enjoying the process of trying to keep that number up, like again, it's not going to be something you can stick to over long term. Like you mentioned that 4x4 method. Like I think it's a very common thing you'll see people when they like get into any fitness endeavor or anything diet related or anything where they're trying to seek towards a certain goal. Like, they'll veer towards the extremes, and I think it's the common issue of people trying to do everything at once when they are going from like not doing nothing at all. And this often, I think, comes alongside like the all or nothing mentality, which is again something that is probably going to impact people's ability to kind of develop these habits over the long term. Because, you know, I'm glad I haven't been in that cycle for a long period of time. I can see how destructive it is for some clients, where they feel as if like if they missed a day of gym, the program's fucked, or like if they've had one day at the weekend where they're eating out, even though it was like an important celebration with like family or friends or dermis or whatever like that, and they find because they had a dessert that they've fucked up the plan, right? And I think like this is also something that, you know, probably impacts people who are maybe having this goal of like improving their longevity. It's like if they miss a week of cardio, if they're not doing something optimally the way, you know, they've heard in human lab, they're like, fuck that, like, you know, and then they're off the track for like the next week. So I guess like when it does come to like maybe some minimum behaviors you would think would be beneficial for somebody to kind of look towards when it does come to this specific goal, right? You already talked about performance-based goal and how that like intrinsic drive is obviously going to help them. But when we're maybe looking at like other things alongside that, right? And obviously the preference for that performance goals is super important too for adherence. But when we maybe look at like parts of nutrition, parts of, you know, activity outside that performance goal, what do you think would be some like minimum behaviors you'd be thinking about as like baselines for this person to start improving their health?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the ones that's not necessarily a physical thing that you do, but is like to try and be more compassionate towards themselves. So I'm researching like long term exercise behavior, and you could basically lift and copy and paste that over to maybe like long term health behaviors in general, because the mechanisms of how it's carried out could be similar. But often that perfectionism And it doesn't really seem to make sense, right? Someone wants to like optimize the longevity, but yet they stop something after 2 weeks because they can't be consistent with that. Just doesn't seem to make any sense. But that is like, classic perfectionism, where it's like I either do it properly or I don't do it at all. And that's often grained into or burned into our brains like as a good thing. It's like I do it right or I don't do it at all. It's like, well, 99% of the time that means you're not doing it at all. And what does doing it right even mean, in any context, realistically? So, but an antidote to that is actually just being a bit more self-compassionate, as in like, because perfectionism often comes with, when you don't achieve it, it comes with being very self-critical. So you're beating yourself up for not being able to do it, rather than like, oh, I wasn't able to do it, but that's fine. But I'll just stop anyway. It's usually they stop. And one of the reasons is because like it's very difficult to try your best at something, and then you struggle, and then you just beat yourself up mentally. It's like, why would you continue to do that? Because you're like, well, I put a lot of effort into this. It's very hard. I fail, and then I just beat myself up for it. So it's like, well, I'll just avoid that, and which kind of makes a lot of sense. So it's actually thinking of how can you, well, one, set the parameters a bit wider, as in like, what is success? What does success look like? And then also, helping them talk to themselves a bit more in a compassionate way. So like not in a judgmental way, but like you learn from it, and you try and move forward to see, okay, you try and problem solve essentially without being overly harsh on yourself. But I think in terms of like more practical things, I think a major one is like activity, like in general, like, and I just see this from the people that I work with as well, and there is like data on this that like the average person just doesn't move enough, like, and that can be any kind of movement, even just like, you could call it zone 1 or you could call it walking, or zone 2 depending on how unfit you are, but like just getting more movement in. So like there's no real magic number. I think if you're getting below like a certain amount of METs per day, or steps, like translated to like 7 or 8,000 steps, you're going to start to have this like dysregulated hunger, just due to kind of like, energy flux. Well, we won't get into that. It's pretty like complicated to try and explain, but basically, just the lower the less active you are, the higher your appetite will be for that level of activity for your body to try and keep a high level of energy flux, so you basically don't starve. So like at least 6, 7, 8,000 steps a day. I think that is like the minimum, because when you get below that, it's like not only having like, secondary effects on like cardiovascular health, but also most people are just going to be hungrier below that. And if you're doing also that little activity, your calories or maintenance calories are going to be quite low as well. So it's like, it's really hard. So I see a lot of people are like, I can't eat 2,000 calories a day. It's way too low. But then they're like, but you're only moving like 4,000 steps a day. Like, it doesn't matter that you weigh 220 pounds or whatever. It's like you don't really move. And they really struggle with hunger. So I think that's one, is just getting more activity in. Like, the more you can do, the better, up to an extent. Like, I wouldn't be recommending people doing like 20,000 a day. That's to become a bit more like, again, perfectionist, neurotic kind of thing, where it's like, okay, that's a bit too much. But let's say anywhere between like 8 and 15. But realistic is just do a little bit more than what you're doing now and try and improve that over time. The other one then I think is adding more fruits and vegetables. So I really like to take a food first approach rather than like a nutrient first approach. So instead of telling people just start tracking, I get them to eat better first, because most of the people that I work with, and most people in general, just don't eat enough plants. So when you eat more of those foods, they typically will tend to displace other foods. So you add more whole grains, more fibrous foods, more plants. You end up typically eating less like ultra processed foods. You end up eating less calories in general, and that can improve then body composition, or it will if you're eating less calories. So that's one, and this is definitely a difficult one, because like if you're eating a lot of highly palatable foods and you switch to like eating like apples, you're like, oh, that doesn't taste as good as eating like Haribo, which I agree with. It doesn't, but your taste buds will like have changed from just eating hyper palatable foods all the time. So I think kids can eat really sweet stuff and their parents will eat them. They're like, oh, that's way too sweet. And I've seen it firsthand as well with like clients who had very bad diets and are eating a lot of junk food, and they'll eat some fruit. Like, I don't like eating that. And it's like, because it doesn't taste good. It's like, well, it's like definitely not going to taste as good as like eating like these foods that are engineered to be like hyper palatable. So I think trying to do that and honestly eating as much as you can, like up to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day seem to be having have benefits. But getting at least the minimum, which is like a 400 grams a day, that's roughly like most countries' guidelines will be around that. Like, you can have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, 400 grams. But like honestly, more I think is better because that will eat more fiber. The next one is like protein, but I don't think that I think a lot of people do have enough protein, especially if people are trying to be a bit more health conscious. Like there's some people who are not, they're not necessarily trying to improve their health. They maybe know that they want to improve their health, but they're not also going to be listening to podcasts about improving their health, right? And that's more, I think that comes down to like, government policies and things like that, and how to improve like that sort of thing. But in terms of the individuals who are like who have the means and ability to improve their health and their diet, I think a lot of them, the first thing they will do is like eating a bit more protein. So I think that's one where I think that's is something that a lot of people do. And then the other one is just like I think removing animal fats as much as you possibly can. So like saturated fats, because it just comes back to the heart disease thing. So a lot of people will eat, processed foods that are cooked in oils that are reheated multiple times and will then as a result have trans fats. It might not be trans fats on the label, but because of how the oil is like how it changes structure when it's constantly reheated. Also then like there is some sort of health push thing where people think like eating lots of red meat and butter is like good for you for some reason. It's more like the kind of primal like sort of individual who like is against is anti-establishment. But I don't think it's not a good idea in terms of your cardiovascular health to start eating more animal protein. So a lot of people or most people who are overweight are also going to probably have high levels of like cholesterol, high levels of blood pressure, because they just kind of go hand in hand through the mechanisms we talked earlier. It's rare that it's not going to be high, and it's certainly not going to be optimal. So it's like, okay, improving that through removing animal fats and ideally maybe going for leaner sources of like maybe poultry or fish, or even trying to get animal proteins, plant proteins. That is really hard, I found, for a lot of people, is to get plant proteins because they just people don't like the taste of them and they're harder to prepare. But adding things like that, reduction in salt. But again, if people reduce their processed foods, they will just naturally reduce their salt intake, because high salt or high sodium diets is not an issue from like people adding salt to their food when they cook at home. That's very, very minimal in terms of the impact. It's actually when you're just eating like sandwiches that you buy in the supermarket, or you're buying these ready-made meals, which is actually those kind of high protein ready-made meals are really, really high in sodium. So if you've got like hypertension, I would avoid them at all costs, or at least check the label to see if they're like, ideally below 1 gram of salt, which is basically never. But those sort of foods, and they're the kind of the major things, I would say. Of course, you could I would say sleep, but I think a lot of people know that they need to sleep. I mean, most people know they would try to go to sleep, and that is also one of the most difficult ones, I think, to change, just because people have to typically get up at a certain time, as in because they have work or they have kids, and then it's usually getting to bed earlier. So it's like, okay, can you read a book, or can you not go on your phone? Way more difficult than like me simply saying it, and probably loads of the people that have been on the podcast talking about the importance of sleep. And I think a lot of people know that they probably need to get a bit more sleep, and that is definitely difficult because you lose parts of your day. So I think they're probably some of the main ones that I would recommend.
Yeah, man, the sleep is, I think, for so many people like such a tough one to get a hang on, because you can always stay up a little bit later and
Yeah,
get more work done. Like I've definitely been feeling that this week. I've been stretching myself thin the entire week and staying up like even like 1 to 1.5 hours later than usual, and I've like noticed the effects already. And like still be getting like what, maybe 7 hours sleep versus 8. But like, when you're used to getting a decent amount of sleep every single night, you definitely do notice the benefits. And it'd still be in okay case. There's people who are pushing that to 6 hours sleep per night, 5 hours sleep per night. And they're doing that chronically, and that's obviously impacting other things downstream. So like one big thing is like hunger regulation. Hunger regulation's off. more drive towards higher palatable foods, harder to be consistent to be going to the gym, harder to achieve like those like higher levels of effort, motivation lower, probably high stress as a result of having that that short sleep. So like it is one of those behaviors that like if it's not taken care of, it can have such negative downstream consequences on so many other behaviors. What so you mentioned like doom scrolling, obviously a big one to try to avoid, keep the phone out of the
Yeah.
room. Like when you're trying to help your clients, what do you find to be like the most effective strategies for like shifting them towards like getting that consistent sleeping wake time?
Yeah, again, it's very difficult. So, like a lot of people, it is on their phone, or they're watching TV, or they just don't have time to do, like they don't have time to spend with their family because they work late. So I could just think of a recent example, which was like, I do think this is why coaching in general can be important rather than people just using ChatGPT to say like go to bed earlier. Is like there was one client recently who he was staying to work. He was staying after work, or working late, let's say, just doing extra work to get extra projects done. And that meant that when he got home, he wouldn't have much time to do a whole lot. So that means he ended up staying up later because he just felt like he had no time to himself. And then because he had no time to himself, he stayed up later. And then that meant in the mornings, he was really tired. So then he wouldn't go to the gym. So like we actually pinpointed that like him not going to the gym was because he was staying at work too late, which sounds crazy. But I think a lot of time I think people staying up is because they don't create some time for themselves just to be at peace and do nothing. It's like they're working and then they're spending too much time on their phone, and they're not winding down, and they're stimulated and they stay up. Something that has worked is putting an alarm uh, on their phone, or like I use personally because I also struggle with like I try, like I'm fallible to everybody else. Just because I know what to do doesn't necessarily mean I'm perfect at it. I use a thing called like a brick. It's actually here. It's like
I
uh
mean,
it's like it's basically just it locks the apps on your phone. I try to use that. I have a meeting with myself in my calendar every day, that tells me to go to bed. And I get a reminder 10 minutes before 9 o'clock that like, okay, you need to start getting ready for bed. Because sometimes I can just end up working late or doing stuff. It doesn't always happen. Like last night I was up quite late to do some work. Um, but I think it's like having it as like a non-negotiable, planning it into your diary, but then figuring out like what are the things that you need to do, and where can you put them in the week? Because people just want to take on too much all the time. It's like we are in this world of like, you always need to be productive and be doing more and like achieving more, and people end up like not being able to fit all the things they want to do into the one day. So sometimes like I've got some clients to like write out their day and what they want it to look like and when they're going to do certain tasks, because it ends up usually they're pushing stuff to the evening, and they're like, I couldn't go to bed because I had to do X, Y, and Z. Even if it is just X, Y, and Z was spend time with myself doing nothing. It's like, well, I only have time to do that at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. So then they're playing video games or whatever it is. So then
mm,
they're doing that late at night. When you can't do everything that you want to do, you have to kind of figure it out when you're going to do it. Because people can't get up later for the most part. Like I've never really
yeah,
experienced someone being able to get up later. It's usually they have to get to bed earlier. And then it is trying to just then when they are in bed, trying to make that as good as possible, their sleep. So that will be obviously trying to avoid as much heavy food or calories before bed. Drinking, no, obviously alcohol, minimize alcohol, or limiting, and same with like stimulants, etc. Like limiting liquids and things like that before bed, and then just creating that environment, the sleep environment, making sure it's like cool and dark, etc. Like, and it's not, yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely probably one of the most difficult things, because of the time. Like we just never feel like we have enough time to do things. I think that's the issue. We're always just connected. Like I personally try and engineer my sleep environment as good as I can as well, because I don't always get as much sleep as I would like. Like I got I wear an eye mask, like a mantra eye mask, I think it's called, or
mm,
mantis or whatever it is. I got an 8 sleep mattress, which I actually really really love. Really expensive, but it's not a mattress actually; it's a mattress topper. But it's like amazing because I'm a hot sleeper, and I haven't woken up to go into the other room once since I've gotten it. It has been winter though, to be fair. We don't have air conditioning here, so like when I go abroad, I will just jack up the air conditioning to like the lowest setting, even if I go to like a hotel in like London or something. And that's what has kind of been working for me, but it is definitely like one of the most difficult ones, but it does have a huge impact on things like you said, your hunger, which can influence your body weight, but also has like secondary effects on things like your hypertension, your blood glucose control, like even independent of like weight gain. And it can have like, of course, sleep deprivation could have like long term impacts on like mental health, etc. So it is definitely difficult, and a lot of people also just struggle to fall asleep as well. That like might benefit from like see cognitive behavioral therapy or other forms of like mental interventions rather than just like, oh, I'm going to take magnesium or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a big fan of reading before I go to sleep. I recently got a Kindle after being a paperback guy for a long period of time, but I just find like when I read before bed, it's like especially reading like fiction book where you're just able to
Mm.
engage in a bit of escapism and you're shifting away completely from like maybe like the madness of the day or that fucking last triggering post that you saw on social media. And like even no matter how exciting the story is, I always get maybe tired after like 1 to 2 chapters, and then that's just like a perfect way to fall asleep. I remember a client saying to me, I think she's studying to be a psychologist at the moment. She was saying that your brain this could be bullshit now, right? Just put that out there. But your brain activates slightly differently when you're reading from like left to right on a page versus when you're kind of scrolling up and down the screen.
Oh well, didn't know that.
Yeah, well, that needs to be confirmed, right? There's 50% truth here.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of it as well is just like this the stimulation of like
Yeah,
I don't even think it's the blue light necessarily, but it's the like stimulation of the just the like I mean you know yourself like social media is made to hook you in to keep you watching to like
yeah,
cause an emotional change. I'm sure if you listen to like something before bed, like it was like Stephen Fry talking about Harry Potter, like I've actually listened to that. Like
yeah.
his voice is very calming. I've done that before bed, and that puts me to sleep. But if I was listening to
Oh,
I don't
really?
know something about like someone going crazy about like the war in Iran or whatever, is like that's a different
Yeah.
type of audio and stimulation, right? Like where it's like you're maybe inducing some fear or like intrigue or concern. So yeah, I think, and then obviously the short form content is like made to just constantly stimulate your brain. Um, so yeah, obviously leaving your phone outside the room if possible is like ideal. It's very simple in practice, but a lot of people struggle to do that. So you just put because it's just like they're just so used to just constantly being on their phone. It's like it's just like almost like you feel like anxious without it. So it's something that I think people could benefit from, like practicing some mindfulness and being like, okay, what do I actually feel if I try and practice not using my phone for a few minutes? Because often we're just like, oh, I'm gonna grab the phone, but it's like, what are you trying to escape or feel
Mm,
in that moment? And it's important to kind of, I think, sit with that and feel like, well, what is it? Like, is it boredom? Is it like anxious? Is it like, you know, what are you feeling? Because people really struggle to concentrate. And I even noticed myself over the last couple of years, I'm finding it harder to read books. Like I do read, and I've got loads of books, and I have to read for like research and stuff. But like actual sit down and just read a novel, it's definitely become a lot harder than it was like
mm.
10 years ago. Or I'm just finding like my attention span has just gotten less.
Yeah, that's definitely something I find, man. I have a terrible tendency to like task switch, especially if I don't have a clear plan for the day. Like if I, wake up on a Monday and I got my check-ins plan like that, there's a routine there, right? But when it comes to like today and tomorrow, especially when the days are a little bit more flexible in regards to what I do, I've terrible tendency to just like go from one thing to the next thing. Be like writing a post here, then be editing a YouTube video over here, and it's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I don't know, like that. Surely there's an effect that social media and everything like that has had. Um, yeah, it's very interesting, man. Maybe that's a
Yeah,
conversation for another day, I guess. I guess like one thing I wanted to speak on because we talked about like nutrients there and like the food first approach to how we can like use that to improve health, right? And obviously there's nutrition has been an area where there's always been some misinformation getting fed here and there, like when you're talking about like the food guidelines, and you're mentioning like even RFK's kind of food guidelines being something that, like, if you were to follow them, like, you have not bad health outcomes. I guess like when those came out, like, did you have any kind of specific thoughts about them? Because I know there's a lot of controversy in the health and wellness sphere once they saw the inverse pyramid.
Yeah, so like I think first of all, like people mix too much like um individual health like guidelines, or not, maybe individual health advice for and public health like advice. So like people will say things like, "Oh, that's like," they'll just conflate the two, and it's often like people who are just like personal trainers or helping people on a one-to-one basis, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's bad." And, like, I definitely have done that in the past, but like these broad public health guidelines, whether it's like medicine or nutrition or exercise, they're made to be broad, to like just a shotgun approach, like easy to digest. Well, hopefully easy to digest, um, and just for like, this is just, oh, people follow this. It's like we're just speaking to everybody, all different races, ages, sizes, like genders, etc. Um, so I don't have many thoughts on it. I think like first of all, I think when he flipped the what is it called, the pyramid upside down, it wasn't really like he flipped it but kept the nutrients in the same place. They kind of turned it 180. So it's still like, yeah, you turned it upside down, but like the pyramid at the bottom is still the same as it was at the bottom almost.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like if they had truly flipped it upside down, then it would have been like sweets and like croissants at the base, right? And like oils and fats, and then like vegetables would be at the top, and where you consume very little. So they just turned it 180, and I think it's more of like like I'm not really too into American politics, but like just going against the previous administration. So we're gonna just go the opposite direction because they are the problem for everything. But yes, things like adding in and I'm not sure if you've like looked into this already, but like they were putting in like the visual guideline has, which a lot of people look at, has like butters and things like that as like, a staple or like a bottom. But then when you look at the actual written guidelines, the saturated fat intake, it still remains the same as like keep it less than 10% of your calories. So that's like, it's confusing at best. But I still think like in general, it's pretty solid. Like, focus on minimally processed foods, eat like whole foods, fruits, vegetables, like minimize like junk food. The thing is, like, the people arguing about it, like, they're the people who already kind of do most things well. It's like the vast majority of people in the US are like overweight. They don't eat. I can't remember the exact number, but it's like the average person doesn't eat like more than one piece of fruit a day. It's like it doesn't matter if you're telling them to like eat a little bit more butter or a little bit less butter, or like they're just not even eating one piece of fruit a day. They're eating McDonald's, for breakfast, and they're eating like, they're drinking like liters of Coca-Cola, So it's like it doesn't matter if they follow the new one or the old one. It's like if they follow either of them, they're gonna have very similar outcomes. And then I think there was some like controversy around the alcohol recommendations, that like it's they changed the kind of guidelines on it, like that. It's like they kind of, I think they highlighted it in a kind of a way that seems that it was like it's something that's to be enjoyed or something like that. I can't really remember, but then I think in the written guidelines still says like no alcohol seems to be, there's no benefit basically for health to alcohol. But again, I think moderation, like it's, I don't think alcohol is helpful, but like moderation again. Um, that's what kind of my thoughts on that. Yeah.
It comes back to the 80-20 principle there, really, with the alcohol,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
What was the one you asked before the pyramid? I can't remember.
Well, it's kind of along the lines of that, in regards to like, food first approach to improving your nutrition to also improve health. I think one thing that I think is probably underspoke about, and I know you spoke about this in a recent YouTube video, is fiber intake, right? Because I think fucking everybody and their mother knows that maybe they should be having a little bit higher protein intake, and even to meet like that like 1.2 threshold, like, which seems to be like a pretty good threshold for like improving health outcomes from protein. That's really fucking easy to hit. Like somebody like an 80-kilo man maybe has to have like 100 grams of protein per day or something like that, which is done through having 3 square meals a day, realistically, with one to 2 clear protein sources. Um, but fiber, I still feel is something that people are missing out on, right? Um, could you speak to some of obviously like the health benefits, but also like where are some easy places for us to put this within the diet? Because I think this is the big thing that people struggle with.
Yeah, so but on the protein thing first, just like I think most people who consume a poor diet will probably consume enough protein anyway, just because they're not just eating like chips, they're eating like burgers and they're eating hot dogs, and they do contain some protein. Obviously, they consume tons of like fats and salts and like calories as well, but they're getting probably enough protein. And most people don't want to be a bodybuilder, right? They're not trying to maximize hypertrophy. Like they do want to probably like build some muscle. Not most people, but like they should try to build some strength and muscle. But you don't, as you know as well, like after like 1.5 or 6 grams per kilo, that's like it's really diminishing. And we don't even know if there's major benefits. There might be some like studies that show like, the Jose Antonio, I think, study where they're showing like massive amounts, but there's like some hasn't necessarily been repeated, like 3 grams per kilo or something like that. Um, but I think most people, yeah, like, well, the RDA, I think they might have revised it in the US to like 1 gram per kilo, but like that's just the minimum amount for like general health. But like, yeah, you said like 1.2 to like, 1.5. But then, yeah, fiber is a big one because like it's not just about what you're adding in, but what it also displaces. So again, fiber is also very filling, like because it slows down gastric emptying. It creates more like actually extends like your stomach, so that like has a impact on like even like things like not intrinsic GLP-1, like obviously not to any degree to compare to like the actual drug. So I'm not saying like the natural GLP-1, like eat this food for that. Like that's just silly. It's like saying eat or do 1 rep max to increase your testosterone. You don't need steroids. Um, but it improves fullness, so you're less likely to eat more. Um, but also, so that will obviously have a natural impact on health, just because like you're eating less, you're going to improve your digestion, you're going to reduce your calorie intake. But also then like on especially the things like cholesterol, so your like soluble fibers, so that's from certain foods like oats, apples, things like legumes. Like these basically are just basically the ones that dissolve in water.
Mhm.
So some fiber is doesn't dissolve in water, and that's just basically helps with like roughage, as in like just digestion. So things like wheat bran, whole grains, like most of that stuff is like you can basically see it in the toilet when you're finished, right? Great for like keeping you full, keeping your like gastric system, like feeding your gastric system, improving gut microbiome diversity, keeping like reducing risk of kind of colorectal cancers, etc. But the soluble fiber helps with reducing cholesterol, because it's not just from what you eat, but it's also how it pulls out food or pulls out cholesterol from your blood. So soluble fiber will like help excrete bile, and then your body has to produce more bile because that breaks down fats, and then it needs kind of cholesterol from the blood to create more of that bile. So basically, it pulls that out. And I do think that most people should, again, it just comes back to eating more fruits and vegetables. And it's not just because they're full of nutrients. And that's what a lot of people will think, oh, fruits and vegetables are full of like micronutrients, which is true. But they're also very high in fiber and different types of fibers, which will have an effect on different gut microbiota. And we still don't know that much about the gut. I mean, the problem with not knowing much about something is that it leaves it open for grifters to come in and claim the role of expert and tell you
Mm.
how their supplements or their protocol will magically impact your gut health. But gut has like this gut brain axis. Most people have heard of that. I've even heard recently, or a couple of years ago, I hadn't seen any recent research, but like potentially gut muscle axis as well. And it has so much impact effects that we probably don't even know yet. But it is comes back to just what sort of fruits and vegetables can you add in. And I like to start with just asking people like, well, what fruits and vegetables do you currently like to eat? Because that's an easy place to start. Because we could say, yeah, go and eat like legumes and like beans and stuff like that for dinner, instead of having like burger and chips. But like they're difficult to cook for a lot of people to actually make them taste good as well. Like if you buy in a canned chickpeas or like beans, like it's it's difficult to make them taste good, in my opinion. I mean, some people, like, so you have to learn how to cook those things, how to prepare them, etc. It can take some time. So I tell people like, okay, well, what fruits and vegetables do you currently like to eat? Can we start to add in some of these to your meals? And typically, even people who say they don't like to eat fruits and vegetables, they will like something. Like they might like banana, or they'll eat some apples or something like that. And then it's like, can you add more nuts and seeds? Because these are also plants that contain fiber. And people don't mind eating some of those as well. Obviously, the ones that are not like coated in chocolates or like salt, like the raw unsalted or even baked unsalted. And then I do recommend to a lot of people consuming psyllium husk, which is like a supplement, or it's the husk of the psyllium plant or seed, and because that is a type of soluble fiber. Because there's not tons and tons of sources of soluble fiber, and if you don't eat oats, then it's also difficult to get a lot of soluble fiber again, because legumes and beans and things like that are difficult to get enough of that, because of the preparation and the taste, etc. I just find it practically, from a practical perspective, I don't know many people that eat them that frequently. So I do recommend people, supplement with like 5 to 10 grams of that per day. Um, and it's just, yeah, really trying to add in more plants, because again, we don't even know what the kind of synergistic effect of some of these nutrients in these plants in the food matrix are having on our health, like the polyphenols, the phytonutrients that are just, we just don't know yet, in terms of like health, disease, performance, cognition. So I think that's why it's better than just like getting supplements. So instead of someone just saying, I'm gonna buy a supplement and just consume like 5 servings of it a day, which is just like one type of fiber, you're missing out on all the other like nutrients, essential and non-essential, in the plants. So that's kind of how I would go about it. And again, it's not super easy, but I think starting slow with adding in more of the things that you do like. And again, this will displace more processed foods, hopefully.
Yeah, I think like that's a big caveat when I am talking to clients about fiber intake. Is like I will generally give them, a fiber target to work towards, because from my view, I think of it as a way that we're driving nutrients in as a whole. Because most foods that we take in, like a source of fiber, they're going to come either with, they could be like a healthy fat source, so they're going to come with more micronutrients, so more vitamins and minerals, right? And having that as a target to go towards versus have 4 to 5 servings of fruit and veg per day, it just kind of gives them like one kind of focus point. But they're also looking at like different sources of fiber, right? They're looking at the whole grains, they're looking at like their nuts and seeds. But I think one big caveat, as you mentioned, is like the likes of supplements, or just be like, okay, I have to hit 35 grams of fiber today, or I'm gonna have 3 fiber 1 bars, or I'm gonna have like 2 fulfill bars, right? And I guess like the fiber in them is like, maybe you could speak more to this. Like, is it true that like some sugar alcohols can be kind of counted towards like fiber intake, and they're not necessarily giving us the health benefits as like the same fiber source from like fucking broccoli?
Yeah, so you often see, like, I was speaking to somebody yesterday where like it's a very American thing where they'll focus on net carbs,
Yeah.
and they had like some modified starch where it's like, it's obviously using, and I'm not a food scientist, but obviously engineered the starch somehow that it doesn't, that can be classified as a fiber. Maybe it's not absorbed properly. So then, because it's not absorbed, they don't technically have to count the calories in it, because you're not passing it through. But yeah, a lot of these like protein bars and alcohol, like that contain like alcohol sugars, they can cause a lot of like bloating, distension, because of like the fermentation in the gut. And yeah, you're kind of the I think one, it can become Goddard's law when you just focus on fiber itself, as a thing where people are just optimizing to hit the fiber number, right? So I've seen people saying, I'm gonna just consume like Metamucil, which is like an American type of fiber supplement that you can buy in like Walgreens or whatever, and they'll just load up on that, versus like, well, we want to get the fiber, but we also want to try and get the different diverse types of fiber in your diet, because we don't know for sure like what, if someone's eating 3 apples and 2 oranges versus like 2 bananas and like how the different types of fruits are going to impact. But I think it's just having a wide variety. So I tell people just to go for colors.
Okay.
Of fruits and vegetables, because again, the colors are what's going to give people, it's the colors are not going to necessarily be as a result of the fiber, but they're going to be the things like the anthocyanins, or the like chlorophyll, the things that give the plants their colors. They're going to have beneficial properties that we perhaps don't really know what the downstream effects are going to be long term. They may be small, But I think again, you're going to get different types of fibers if you're going for different types of foods, rather than like, okay, I'm just gonna hit a fiber target, and then therefore I'm just gonna, eat 2 Quest bars or something like that. And I've done that before, where I've had like 5 Quest bars in a day, like years ago, and you don't feel good, right? Because you've got a lot of the same type of fiber in your stomach at once, and you just feel like super thirsty, and you actually end up becoming constipated.
Yeah, I learned the lesson hard way by eating a whole fulfill Easter egg. When I was
Oh, I didn't even know there's such thing.
yeah, there was like a
Uh,
fulfill Easter egg. I ate it was this a couple of years ago. I was like violently hungover, decided to have that, and yeah, tell you what, those sugar alcohols do not absorb; they just go straight through you. So,
Yeah, yeah.
like,
There's stuff like that. There's the David bar protein they've like engineered. I don't know too much about it, but like a certain type of, I think it's I think it's alcohol sugar, where again it's not absorbed by the body. I can't remember the name of it. Lane Norton and
yeah,
Peter Thier, I think, are like co-founders, or there might be someone else as well, and they were able to kind of get around it. It's like an engineered fat, and they bought the patent for it, so it can't be absorbed, so they don't have to count the calories, and that's why it's like less than 200 calories, but it's like 30 grams of protein or something like. So basically, all the calories are just counted from the protein, I think, or 28 grams of protein, which sounds amazing, but again, it's just stuff that's just passing through you, and they're just using it to, like, yeah. I don't know like long-term health impacts on that. I haven't looked into it, but like you don't want something that just completely passes through. Obviously fiber does, but if other things are like modified, that are not getting digested at all, and they just come out the same as they went in, that's going to be, questionable of how that's going to make you feel.
yeah. I think expecting anything that's like that to really be something to be a staple within your diet over long term, other than being like a convenient food source when it's needed, is probably not something you should really be considering from like a I'm adding this to try to improve my health. Like it's the way I kind of view things like protein bars and kind of thing of the sorts. Like they're great in a pinch, and if you do need them to like kind of meet like a requirement, but if they're a primary source of protein within your day, like, and you're maybe hitting like 140 grams of protein, like 140 grams of protein, 120 grams of protein, they can be hit with just some adjustment through regular food sources that could still be like easily prepped. And as well, they have also a lower like economic footprint in regards to like how much money you're going to spend. Like just you're eating like loads of protein bars every single day. Yeah, it's going to be expensive to eat a higher protein diet, So like these are also things to consider. And as well, if people are just having them there as like a form of sweet treat, like again, I think you could just have this sweet treat and have a bit higher protein in like a different meal versus go towards this. Just different ways around it. I don't know what your kind of opinion on that type of shtick would be.
Yeah, I think like a protein bar, if the person would have usually had like a Snickers bar or something,
Yeah,
like maybe it's slightly better if they're struggling with protein. But again, if they're not, I think it's not a major benefit in my opinion. I mean, I used to eat loads of protein bars as well. I used to eat them the odd time, but like, yeah, I don't think it's like, again, if you're struggling to get enough protein, I think it can help contribute to it. Again, if you're like, especially if you're a smaller person, right, like 20 grams of protein can be like a non insignificant amount.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, like if you're like eating multiple protein bars a day, um, it's just not going to make you feel necessarily good. They're not necessarily the best source of like nutrients as well. Like also alcohol, sugars, like they just don't get digested. Um, I don't even think that the alcohol sugars, again, like none of them are. I don't believe there's any natural occurring alcohol sugars. The protein bars, sometimes they do contain additional fiber as well. Some of them, I'm not sure, like Quest can be quite high in protein. I don't think the alcohol sugars contribute to the actual protein number, but they're just not digested, so they don't have to count the calories. But yeah, I think like we've over healthified certain things, as in like we focused on protein way too much, to the point where people are just eating like high processed foods now that are just high protein. So like and they're justifying snacking on stuff throughout the day because it's like higher in protein, without actually And that's again that displaces something else that they could have potentially eating. So I always kind of say, well, compared to what, right? So you don't eat just a protein bar; you would have eaten something else instead. So like if you're eating now all this protein snack, this protein snack, that, a lot of them are highly processed foods, which isn't inherently a problem. But if that causes you to overeat, or to like displace something else that you would have had, like could be fruits or vegetables or some whole grains, then that's a problem in my opinion. So on the whole, I think they're probably like I'm indifferent whether like a net positive or a net negative. I do think like people being more aware of protein is a good thing with all the protein yogurts and things like that. And I think most people now know that like protein is something that they should consume.
Yeah, as I said, like I do very much think it's like it's a context dependent thing, isn't it?
Mm.
Where you implement them or not. Again, I was similar to yourself. I used to eat protein bars all the time, just to get my protein up. But I guess like as you kind of said there, like if you're already kind of meeting like a threshold for like what is sufficient protein for you, your goals, it's like adding more in when you could just get like the same those calories could come from like something else that might benefit you or even just like be there for from enjoyment perspective. Like if you do in that context, you're meeting, you're staying within your calories, you have a decent amount of micronutrients within your diet, you're hitting your protein. If you pick the Snicker bars over the full fill bar, it's like that's fine. Again,
Yeah.
it comes back to
Yeah,
that.
it's not gonna
It comes back
it's
to
not
aim.
gonna have like an impact on long term. I think people again they kind of almost are justifying that, well, like it's healthy.
Yeah.
And it's come back to like the healthy versus non-healthy foods, which I don't think, I've kind of come a bit full circle on that. Like I don't think it's necessarily bad to label foods in that way from a general health perspective, because again, you're not going to be able to sit down and teach everybody in the world about like the nuances of, well, like it doesn't matter, it's about calorie balance. And
Yeah.
it is good to have like, okay, well, that's like burgers and chips and stuff like that are not necessarily a healthy food. So like, yes, you could technically fit them into your diet, but like you don't. It's just you have to end up explaining kind of all thermodynamics and like calories and everything and macros to people. It's just like, okay, some foods are a bit more health focused, others are not.
Mm.
And but then the problem is that there's an area in the middle that's completely grey, like things like cheese or you know
Yeah.
milk and stuff like that, like or you know. So I think balance is going to be key, and I do try and get people to have like balance with their diet, even if their goal is like longevity, because I know for sure that like people just cannot stick to like the perfect diet forever. And when they try and do that, that is like a major red flag when they want to do that for me, because like if you want to improve your longevity, your health span, that means like when you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and if you're currently in your 30s, 20s, 40s, whatever, it's like that's not something that you do for 8 weeks. It's like it needs to be for a long, long time. So how are you going to be able to like live a normal life, and do this for a long, long time? It's like, well, you're not going to be able to, avoid X food forever. So when I see clients or when a clients say I want to just like go cold turkey off sugar, or I want to, remove X, Y, and Z. Other than alcohol, like I think I do usually recommend that. But like if they want to do that, but like other things, they want to just arbitrarily move out of their or remove from their diet, or they want to do something extreme. That's when it's like, oh, I don't really recommend that sort of stuff, because like you're gonna end up struggling because it's like quite extreme, and then it just reinforces this black and white mindset again if they fail.
Yeah. I think like the more things that from a dietary perspective and like a long-term perspective, the more things like people put as like must avoid or must restrict, they just automatically make it so much harder for them to adapt to any circumstance. Because like there's gonna be some certain like some situations where like if you're like I'm cutting out sugar, where like you will inevitably have to have some sugar come to your diet, and that then do you take that approach which we talked about to start, the perfectionism mindset, and like now you fucked it, and now you just revert to square one. And like obviously some of this also comes down to just like maybe some education around like what are the ill like what's the ills of having like more sugar in diet versus not, like how realistic is it to like completely avoid it, and other things like people being afraid of sweeteners, or people being afraid of food dyes, or like foods that are not quote unquote natural. The more things you take off the table for yourself, the harder it can be. And this could even be down to, you'll often hear people saying, I heard keto this is really good for you. So, I'm going to follow a ketogenic diet because I've done it a few times and I felt great doing it. So if I could just stick to that, I'll probably feel better over the long term. It's like, if they tried it a few times, they've also fell off the track wagon a few times. What's the reason for that? Because it probably wasn't sustainable. Same with fasting. You're like, oh, I feel great with fasting, and I do like maybe a fast every week, but they didn't stick to it. I was like, so
Exactly, yeah.
yeah, what are we trying to achieve here?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like remove it because you have to. The thing is, you have to eat, and I think that's also a reason why everyone has an opinion on food, right? Because everyone eats. Like not everyone has an opinion on like the dynamics of like suspension bridges, like because not everyone it's not something that comes into your life on a day-to-day basis. Whereas actually nutrition could probably be there are elements of nutrition that can probably be as complex as like the engineering of suspension bridges, right? When you're talking about like the actual science of it rather than like behavioral, like 80/20. But the thing is, you can't, if you remove something, you have to replace it with something else for the most part, unless you're just going to not eat, right? So I think like you could remove, like, I'm not going to drink alcohol. You don't have to then drink, non-alcoholics. You could just drink water. Like, I mean, everyone obviously has to drink, but like you can, if you have like a beer every night or a couple glass of vodka or whatever, you don't have to have that and you'll be fine if you don't drink that. Whereas with food, you have to eat. So when they say I'm going to remove X, Y, and Z, it's like, well, like what are you planning to replace? For that. And then I think that's where also people then they lose the context because yeah, you might remove sugar, but like then you have people reading the label of like, oh, this has 2 extra grams of added sugar, but yet they're like they have no idea how much calories they're consuming, or they have no idea how much fiber they're consuming, or they don't eat much fruits and vegetables, but yet they're trying to avoid sugar or like artificial sweeteners. Like, okay, I'm off artificial sweeteners, or I'm not eating palm oil or whatever it is, and but yet it's not really getting them to their goal because it's just like picking one villain, and well, that actually may or may not have actual any impact on your health, but it's like you're missing the forest for the trees, and I think you only have so much mental energy to focus on anything, to be honest. So you're choosing to, I think like Mark Manson has like the subtle art of not giving a fuck, his book, and it's like basically you can only give so many fucks. So like if you're choosing to focus on something so specific that may not have a meaningful impact, then you kind of are choosing not to focus on the more important things. And that comes back to the 80/20. It's like it's not that the 20% or the 80 that extra 80% that might give you a little bit extra edge. It's not that might not have an impact, like saunas or cold plunges or like red light therapy. Like probably very insignificant, but it could have some impact. But like if you only have so much time or mental energy or bandwidth or money or whatever it is to focus on your health, it's like by focusing on that stuff, you've then relinquished your ability to focus on the stuff that actually works, like moving more, like that takes time, or like preparing fruits and vegetables and eating them, or like being mindful around your food, as in like practicing mindfulness, so you're not just compulsively eating and like just labeling it as it's like a health food, right? Or it has protein on it, so it must be good. And that's like something that I notice a lot with people I've worked with, is like they're buying Brian Johnson's $400 supplement stack per month. There may be some like benefits of some of the ingredients, like a lot of them are not like don't have much evidence in humans, but like they're focusing their energy on that sort of stuff, or like some other protocols like that doing, but yet not allocating the time to like actually just do more than a couple thousand steps a day, or to like eat regular meals, or to like pause before they are eating junk food, right? And these will have such a greater impact on the actual goal that they're trying to achieve than like the small things. But again, because like on social media, on the news, like these new novel things are what people like want to hear and get clicks. That's what people get drawn to, and they kind of start to think that okay, that actually is the stuff that I need to focus on.
Yeah, missing the forest for the trees, essentially. And yeah, kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Leaning into the things that are probably very easy to do and feel like they don't have like much of a mental investment. they might have a pretty substantial financial investment, right? Like if you're buying,
Mm.
if you're spending 400 quid in supplements a month, like, and you're not doing anything else, like, oh my God, yeah,
Yeah.
we need to have a talk.
Well, I used to have like a client, like I won't name any names, like, and like
Yeah,
it's just we had a conversation about it before, but like he used to fly around to different countries to get like infusions of various vitamins and stuff, and like wellness clinics in different countries. But like he told me that like he didn't have time to like eat well, and he had to eat like burgers and chips for lunch, because of because of time commitment. So it's like you have to be almost kind of self-aware or be willing to work on that. It's like, well, what am I trying to achieve here, and what are my actual blockers? And it's the same with like the perfectionism stuff. It, like perfectionism can stop people from doing certain things, but can also lead to procrastination or working on things that are actually not going to move you anywhere. So you feel like basically you're a busy fool
yeah.
almost. Like you're constantly busy but not really getting anywhere, and that can seem like you're doing stuff. But you need to be one a willing to recognize that that is a problem, and then to be willing to work on it, because it's all well and good say like, oh yeah, I'm a perfectionist and it's like holding me back, but you have to be then willing to engage to work on that, and it will be difficult because you're going to want to do the thing or want to feel the pull to do that, but you have to sit with it, engage and explore yourself. And if you're not willing to, then you're kind of not really going to get very far, because you're just plastering, putting plasters over something that needs some stitches.
Good example of that is listening to podcasts like these, because how many people listen to the human podcast, or like, geez, even my podcast, and like, while I hope I'll be putting out some decent content and helpful content, how many people just listen to podcasts and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna fucking do that, and then they don't change anything after listening to it, and they're just continuing to like fill themselves with knowledge and never like actually like put their foot forward and actually commit to maybe that one thing that they found would be actually quite useful for them, or to improve their health, improve their performance, body composition, or whatever it may be. And yeah, as you said, you're kind of like procrastinating. You feel like you're doing something beneficial for you, but you're not really.
Mm.
Which is obviously challenged in today's age with so much information and so much noise, but yeah, something I think about, especially when I also recognize the same pattern myself. If I'm listening to something related to business, I'm like, that sounds really good, and then after the podcast, I don't implement any of it. Like, you're such
Yeah, yeah. I think like Tony Robbins, who's like this. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but like this
oh
kind of
yeah,
guru kind of guy. Like I don't really I don't watch his stuff, but I used to read his books like years ago, and like
awaken the
he
giant.
basically
Yeah,
said like, yeah, have it here behind me. He basically said like, if you're consistent with anything, it will work, which is pretty true. Like even when it's business or it's health. I mean, obviously there are certain things that like maybe that's not 100% true. Like you could be, if you're just eating McDonald's all the time, you're like, I'm trying to lose weight, or like that's probably not going to work. But if you're consistent with something that kind of works or is getting you some results, then that'll probably work. Like the same with like lifting or anything. But yeah, when it comes to like the health stuff, it's like, well, like is your, well, I think if people are really like numbers, they can do like, there's something called like the ASCVD 10-year risk. So you can basically, you look at certain blood markers and then it'll give you like your risk score, and that will tell you like, okay, well, I need to focus on getting these numbers down, and then that will like dictate what you do, sort of thing. So like, because people don't want just like, especially if they're like, they consider themselves like proactive optimizers, they want tangible numbers and data and things like that, rather than just like, oh yeah, just be consistent with exercise. It's like almost frustrating to hear that,
yeah.
or like, oh, I just lift and just eat well, like it doesn't really matter. So they could look at something like that, and then if they're like non-HDL is like high, okay, well, like why is that? Like how can I reduce that? And then they have some actions. I think it's like body fat, like doing enough cardio, like a minimum couple hours a week, eating at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, like getting at least 60 minutes of lifting a week. I think it's probably a lot more less than people think, but like that's for health. Like again, more is probably better, but like if you're training 6 days a week in the gym and your goal is like longevity and health, but yet you're overweight and like you don't do really any cardio, then I would actually recommend like that person would stop doing so much lifting to focus on like being able to, if they don't have the time, to be able to like either prepare food better, or to like go do some cardio, or just take some downtime to like, you know, reduce their stress or whatever. And they're really going to be the big ones, like, because if you do those three things, like you're leaner, you're lifting, you're doing cardio, it does take care of, like, for the most part, things like blood pressure, things like cholesterol, um, and then like resulting risks of like heart disease, etc. And like that's the main thing. And then of course, like spending time with friends and family, they're definitely a little bit more difficult to quantify. There's like some tests that you could do, like the Burns depression test and things like that. But that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but it's also, they're definitely a lot more difficult to like, well, like, do I spend a certain amount of time with people? Like, you know, do I spend 100 minutes a week? I'd say, I spend 100 minutes a week talking to people, or I spend, next week it's going to be progressively overloaded, 120 minutes. Like, that's a bit more difficult to like, how do you quantify like meaningful interactions and things like that? But it's just not getting too caught up. And I often do have to have conversations with some people who are like really lean, as in maybe like 12% body fat, doing everything well, and they're like training consistently, like everything is pretty much as good as it's gonna get, and they're trying to optimize more. I often have to have the conversation of like what are you trying to achieve here? Because it's often stressing them out, or like they're actually becoming too perfectionist, in the sense that sometimes people, when they're perfectionist, they avoid, or they procrastinate, or they self-sabotage, but other times people will constantly just keep setting the bar higher and higher but never feel good enough, and that can be extremely draining mentally. Like, it's never good enough. You're always hitting it, and that might seem like it's striving, but it's actually can be quite detrimental for your like well-being, because it's just draining. And I have to have the conversation of like, well, look, this is like objectively not going to get any better. Like, what are you trying to achieve here? Like, and that might mean they need to go and like, you know, speak to like a therapist or something like that about like why they're always trying to achieve this. Like, that's not my area of expertise, but sometimes you can be like, you're kind of, you're doing everything right here, and that is also a challenge, where some people are just trying to like be like Brian Johnson and trying to do everything, when actually they've gotten like 99% of the results he would get, but they're just trying to do more and more and more.
I only want to ask like maybe like one or two additional questions, right? Because I think we've covered a lot, like the basics of like what people should really be focused on for like improving their health span. But I do also want to ask about like some common things I hear more so these days. So one of them that I think is coming up more and more is like continuous glucose monitors. So, you know, we hear about people who have diabetes using these, of course, right? But like for the average person, right? Like, is there any applicability in using these to help with health?
I don't personally think so. So like, this is something that I was really interested in myself. A friend of mine is like an investor in like Levels, which is like one of the biggest companies. He's not like a health like expert or anything like that. He just had money, I guess. Um, and like, obviously I love gadgets. I bought like, you know, Aura, all these kind of Eat Sleep, like, so, and I do like the info. And I did think like, oh, that might be actually a good idea, because like, you know, when I first started lifting and learned about nutrition, I avoided sugar because of insulin, right? But I think it needs to be reframed that insulin is like a bad thing. It's just like a hormone that is used for like storage and amongst other things, but like shuttling nutrients into cells, whether it be a fat or muscle. Um, and people talk about increases in insulin as if it's like a spike, as if that's like a bad thing, as if like, oh, your heart rate spiked, that's like a worrying. But like, it's it's all context dependent, like, because your blood pressure can go through the roof when you're doing a 1 rep max squat, or your heart rate will go through the roof if you're sprinting. But that's not the same as just like, that's a normal response. It's not the same as someone just sitting there and like you're having this like, oh, your blood pressure is like 180 over like, 120, like you need to go to the hospital. So like, blood glucose goes up and goes down. Or sorry, insulin goes up and down to keep your blood glucose kind of tightly controlled and to get the nutrients to where they want to go. So most people's blood glucose won't go above like, let's say 180, which is, where it starts to be a problem. And I'm not sure now if blood glucose monitors have been validated for diabetes management, but I've seen people use them. Like a friend had used them, but I wasn't sure if they were actually validated. But for people who are most people who are using them from the likes of the Levels and other are not pre-diabetic or diabetic, and they're using it just to see what my response is to eating a certain food, and they just assume that higher is worse. So like if I eat white bread, it's going to be higher than if I eat like nuts, and that's of course going to be true because there's glucose in bread, right, and there's not in nuts. But they just make this assumption that higher is somehow worse because we know that, diabetes is basically your body's inability to control glucose properly, whether that's from like poor insulin secretion or like just glucose uptake. But that doesn't mean that it's just this gradient thing where it's just like, okay, well, some glucose response is bad, and then if I keep doing that, I'm eventually going to get diabetes. Because diabetes is actually a result of over consumption of food, and as we talked about earlier, like the you're passing something called your personal fat threshold, where basically your body is you've started to store fat in places where it's not supposed to be stored, then it impacts your natural insulin production and blood glucose control through like inflammation of the tissues and things like that. So it's actually from chronic overnutrition. So you can get diabetes, as you probably are aware, from like if you're on a keto diet, you technically get diabetes. Just most people won't eat enough for long enough in a keto diet to get obese, right? It's usually like combination of fat and sugar and salt and all of these like just high calorie foods. So it doesn't really seem to make any difference. And I think the issue is that the way that the companies use the data is that it starts to push you towards maintaining a low blood glucose all the time, as if like normal ranges within or normal fluctuations within the normal range are a problem. So people can end up starting, like if you ate bacon and butter for breakfast, you're not going to have a high glucose response, but that's not healthy food, right? If you're eating like protein or peanut butter bombs and like drowning everything in coconut oil and like adding coconut oil to your coffee or whatever it is, like these are all going to keep your blood glucose lower than if you were having the same amount of food but from carbohydrates. But they're not necessarily helpful, and they're not even necessarily going to reduce your risk of diabetes, because you're kind of almost saying, oh well, like increases in blood glucose leads to diabetes, therefore I somehow should just keep my blood glucose always really low. And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding. Now I have seen some stuff where like people who do have, say, poorer blood glucose control, I'm mincing my words here, let's say they pre-diabetes or something like that, like there does seem to be some problems if your blood glucose goes like really, really high, like it does spike very, very high, as in beyond the normal range, and that's usually going to be with people who have like diabetes or pre-diabetes. So they might find that, okay, well, having slightly lower carbohydrates, or at least lower glycemic load, where I'm not eating massive amounts of carbohydrates by themselves, may be better long term. But we've seen that like fat loss in general doesn't matter if you're having like low carb or low fat. It's kind of just like calorie controlled. So I think maybe for people who are like pre-diabetic or diabetic, to see if it like certain foods may cause them to go beyond that like 180 number. That's an American kind of cutoff. That might be beneficial, but for the average person who's trying to like optimize their health, I think it focuses on the wrong thing, and it doesn't really do anything. Like we still don't even really understand. Like for example, in sports, they've recently found that your blood glucose actually goes quite up, goes up quite a bit when you're doing like high intensity sports, and it's more to do with like, for example, like cortisol increases and like stress hormones that will like release glucose from the liver to kind of basically give you more energy. When people are mentally stressed, they also notice that their blood glucose kind of goes up as well. So this is a lot more information, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. So I don't think it's something that people should buy, and I certainly don't think it's something that's going to lead to improved weight loss, which is what they're usually sold for, right? Like you buy these products to improve your health because people with diabetes have poor glucose control. Therefore, those who control their blood glucose or keep it low will not get diabetes. That's the whole kind of message, which isn't true, because again, you could just eat like nuts and peanut butter all day and like bacon and steaks and all these low glycemic index foods, but still high in calories, and you just won't lose any weight. And they're not overly simple to use. Like, I mean, it's way easier if you just learn to use like MyFitnessPal or something, right?
Yeah. It's almost like reverse causality. Like type example.
Exactly. And I've never seen anyone that's like, I've had friends and stuff that have used them. I've never seen them use them long term because like ultimately what they're trying to use them for is to like lose weight. But it's just restrictive and it's saying, oh well, like I shouldn't be eating like, why is it saying that when I eat oranges it goes up more versus like I'm eating pears? And it's like, well, like there's so many factors that cause blood glucose to go up. As in like if you ate that when you're a bit more stressed, or you had just gone for a walk or a run or something where it might go up a bit, or like you ate it after training or whatever. Like there's so many factors that cause that. You can't just say that's that food.
Mm.
Um, and I believe there was a study by Kevin Hall, and I can't remember who else, a couple of years ago, where they just basically gave the people exact same food for, I don't know if it was one day or multiple days, and then they mounted their blood glucose and gave them the exact same foods again, and their blood glucose was completely different. So it's just like, well, you know, what this info is not really like helpful in terms of practical application.
Yeah, probably like other factors other than the food is like driving up,
Exactly, yeah,
right? Um,
exactly.
final question, and you don't have to spend too long answering this.
Sure.
It's really just about blood testing, right? So like obviously blood tests, they can give you good ideas to what's going on internally. Um, but I wonder what your perspective is on like, the frequency of doing these, or what would be maybe like just a simple decision making process for people deciding when to get them done.
Yeah, I honestly think that like people should get less blood tests than they
Yeah.
need. Like just looking at like your lipids and stuff, is probably is the main ones. Because when you go looking for something, you'll find it, right? So like, overdiagnosis, or misdiagnosis, and I see all the coaches all the time that are like trying to like sell like higher price solutions where they'll talk about all these blood tests that they'll do, and like I don't know whether they're uploading the chat GPT or they're just like trying to like look at like, oh, this is in the red range or the green range or whatever. But it doesn't seem to be any benefits from doing this other than like, let's say perhaps your lipids or your blood glucose control, by like, okay, this like, oh, your X amount is low, therefore we need to change something, because most diseases or issues will have some sort of symptom with them, and I don't think it will change anything. So for example, if someone has like really low iron, and then the coach might say, oh, we'll introduce this food into your diet. But if they're eating a balanced diet already, which is what a coach should be trying to get someone to do, is moving towards it, you're not going to have deficiencies, right? So it's not like, oh, you're deficient in this nutrient, therefore we need to eat more of this. It's like, well, number one, if it's like still chronically deficient and they're already eating enough of foods that should give you that, then there's something else going on, right? And most coaches won't be able to like diagnose what that is because we need further tests and you need workup and stuff like that. And I've seen that a lot where coaches like this person's really deficient in this in spite of eating it, therefore we're going to massively supplement. It's like, oh, that's like, you're not solving the root problem there. That could be something more sinister. And then the other stuff is just like normal fluctuations. So I think it's like you're kind of, again, you're looking for something, and if you keep looking for something, you'll find it. I had experience recently where, like, because of my hypertension that I had a few years ago, got so many tests, and I've done 3 MRIs, multiple ultrasounds, lots of different things, and ultimately, like, it's led to nothing in terms of like outcomes or changes other than a load of health anxiety and like thousands and thousands spent. Whereas like if I hadn't got that initial test, which obviously I didn't choose to do it, they wouldn't have found anything specific, but because they found something similar that was not even to do with like the hypertension, it's like some scarring on my heart. It led to loads of tests and like literally years of like testing and consultants, and that's the issue when you keep looking for something in the body. So I think like other than lipids and blood glucose control, whether it's fasting or HbA1c, there's no evidence to suggest that like, oh, I do these 300 tests and we're looking to optimize, that's actually a good idea.
Mm. Yeah, we had a Jordan Feigenbaum on the podcast a couple months ago,
Oh
and
yeah.
like, we were talking about like this type of subject, and one thing he even mentioned was like, when you're looking at bloods, and there's aspects of like people doing testing for things that have a low prevalence of happening in the population, or low risk of it ever happening to you, but people seeking out the tests anyway from like, this could be, a certain disease that you could get as you get older, but maybe high blood pressure gets you sooner, right? So you're thinking about like, what are the most important things to really be tested for, and that comes down to like blood pressure, checking like lipids, keep in line things like BMI is like just a simple kind of metric, right? Looking at these things that are probably having the most prevalence or most like indication of like maybe some negative health outcomes, and then like if you're searching for some rare obscure disease that you've heard on again a podcast, they're saying that like this food increases this type of brain cancer, or like having I don't know, fucking using plastic Tupperware is going to like cause you to get like some neurodegenerative disease that could happen. But if you have hypertension, like stage from 2 hypertension, like can get you quicker than like that neurodegenerative disease later on in life,
Exactly.
right? So yeah, it's something that when it does come to like my own kind of approach to it is like I will generally get people to push their habits and behaviors towards a specific kind of place before they even consider getting blood tests done, unless there's something completely off. And again, it's not my place as a fucking fitness coach to tell somebody to get bloods, or my place to even like look at them, because I'm just not qualified. And I always say that to people, even when they do send me over bloods, that like I have limited knowledge on how all this shit works, because all of it is interacting. So you really just need to kind of speak with your doctor. And like if something flags, we can possibly do something on the dietary front, the exercise front, maybe, like even if it's a case like some inflammation markers being off because they were training hard all the way up to their blood test, right? And they can do a retest. But after that, it's like it's in the kind of doctor's hands. And I think that it's the role that too many coaches, like in my position, try to play when they're not doctor. Like how many fucking PTs haven't done any further education aside from looking at Instagram posts and doing their fucking level 4 cert. That's a very common scenario.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, and it's like we didn't really touch on it, but like I see now it's like, well, peptides as well. It's becoming
Yeah,
like not the
that's,
not
that's a
the likes
whole,
of the GLP-1 agonist. It's the like the research peptides, and it's funny that like you have coaches who are like I'm not a doctor either, but you have like people who are like just personal trainers, and they're talking about health, and then they're like, oh, we shouldn't eat this food because it's bad for you or something like that. But yet they're also being like, oh yeah, if you want like high grade peptides, like I know where to get them. It's like health optimizations. Like there's literally no research in humans in most of these things, like the safety or efficacy. It's like it makes how is that health promoting? It's crazy. But again, it comes back to the like the shiny object thing, where it's like I've had clients who literally have like I was pretty confident they had like torn like a bicep or something, and I'm like, you need to go to a physio. Like I'm pretty sure your bicep's like torn. And like, oh well, I know this guy's going to sell me BCP 157, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I'll take that for a while. It's like, no, go to a physio. It's like get diagnosed of what's wrong with you. It's like they don't want to do that. Like, and it's crazy. So yeah, no, it's a topic for another conversation with someone that's smarter than me on the topic. But it is interesting, and I do see it like more and more. I've got like probably 20% of the clients that I've worked with have asked about them, and I just really like I don't know, but like there's very little evidence on them, and most of the time they're not even legal for doctors to be selling.
yeah. Well, the way I kind of see them at the moment is kind of similar to like how pro hormones were back in the day.
Mm.
We've had that cycle with that. Remember for a while, like everybody was talking about how CBD is going to cure every disease under the sun. Like obviously, the peptides, it's not just one, right? There's many of them, but like 5 to 10 years, these could be completely gone, forgotten about, or we see because so many of them haven't been looked at extensively and people are taking too much of them that or taking them ill
Mm.
advised and essentially engaging in polypharmacy, that people are having some negative health impacts.
Yeah,
And yeah, like it's really hard to fucking
and
say.
it's like the funny
What
thing
about
is that you've got like someone will take one and then they'll just be taking extra ones as if just because they're both called or they're all called peptides. It's like, well, I'm already taking one peptide, so what's the harm in taking another one? It's like almost like saying, well, I'm taking paracetamol, so what's the harm in taking like oxycontin or like codeine or morphine because they're all painkillers. It's pretty funny that like it's just a lack of, I don't know, critical thinking, I think. And yeah, I think it's gonna be a problem for a lot of people. Like if these do have unfortunate negative consequences, there's gonna be a long term. Hopefully not, but you never know.
Mm. Apologies, my internet for some reason's been very shitty here. Um, Adam, I really, really appreciate all your time. You spent a little bit longer than we planned, but I do appreciate. You're an absolute legend. Could you
No
just
worries.
let everybody know where they can find out more, like from about your content, what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean the best place to probably find me is just on YouTube. You just search my name, and I should come up at a McDonald. And yeah, if they want to follow, they can.
Cool. I'll leave all of your information, YouTube links in the description because I'll have this on YouTube as well. Awesome.
Nice one.
Right.
All right,
If you did enjoy the
great chat.
podcast, make sure to leave a rating and review on the podcast platform we're listening on. And yeah, I'll leave all Adam's stuff in the description and we will talk soon.